the recording.
Yeah, and go ahead and bring up the first slide. And well, let's get started. Welcome to the California Advisory Committee on Geographic Names. And I've sort of been thinking about this meeting as our kickoff meeting because lots has changed since our last meeting. And hang on a second. Okay, so we haven't met since February of 2020, so we'll be going over the changes today that have occurred between now and last year. And this meeting is really for the committee members and the advisors and the ex officios. We are recording the meeting and it will be available on the website. So let me introduce myself. I'm Tiffany Meyer. I'm from CAL FIRE. I work for the Fire and Resource Assessment Program and I'm the GIS Program Manager. And I joined the California Advisory Committee in 2010, and I've held the chair position previously for 2 years. And now I'm currently the acting chair for a year because I'm actually the longest standing committee member at the moment. So it just naturally happened that I would take over the chair for now during this transition until everything kind of settles into place. So let's go to the next slide. Just to go over today's objectives really quickly. First of all, we're going to introduce the commission, its charter and members, and clarify commission roles and responsibilities and confirm the charter, and then discuss commission process and prepare for future meetings. Next slide, please. So first, just to get going, we're going to go through a roll call to see who's joined us today. And so when I call your position on the committee, just if you could give us your name and feel free to say something briefly about yourself, maybe even your interest in the committee or geographic names, but don't feel like you have to. It's up to you if you want to just yell out your name or give us a little information about you. And in the interest of time, we're just going to keep the roll call to the people that are involved in the committee directly. So here goes. So who do we have for the Department of Water Resources? And if you're on mute, make sure you unmute your phone. Anybody from the Department of Water Resources?
So, yeah, this is Jane Schaefer-Kramer, but I am not here representing the Clayton Giroud, who I believe is the rostered member of the committee. I'm here as an interested member of state government workforce.
Great, thanks for joining us, Jane. And I'm pointing out that Clayton is not here yet. Okay, so Departments of Park and Recreation. Daniel, are you here?
Yeah, my name's Daniel Walsh. Hi.
Hi, Daniel. Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Is that Richard?
Yeah, this is Richard Liss. I'm a botanist and I'm up in Redding. And I always had an interest in geographic names for some reason. And in thinking about it, I realized when I was in geology, I was interested in how they came with, names of formations. And I got into paleontology and then fossil names. And then I became a plant taxonomist. So then I really got immersed in nomenclature and names. And so I guess I've had quite an interest in this all my life, and I didn't really think about it till you brought up the question in the email.
Great. Well, thanks for joining the committee, Richard. And
thank you.
Look forward to working with you. Department of Conservation.
Hi, I'm Janine Bird, Department of Conservation, and specifically I'm with the California Geological Survey. I do GIS and make maps, so I have quite an interest in what labels go on maps and where they come from.
Excellent. Yes, it always involves maps. Department of Forest and Fire Protection. That's me, Tiffany Meyer. Already told you guys a little bit about me. And then we have new members from a member from the Native American Heritage Commission.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Treadway. I am standing in for Executive Secretary Christina Snyder, who should be on the line at sometimes after 10, but so I'm just standing in her place until she's able to get into our meeting.
Great. And California State Library.
I'm Greg Lucas, the California State Librarian. I'm joined by Kira Healy and Sue Tyson, have already done some work for the committee.
Absolutely. Thank you. And California African American Museum.
I'm Susan Anderson. I'm the history curator at the California African American Museum. And my subject areas include California history, ethnic community history, and African American history.
Great. Welcome. Okay, so that's our committee members. I'm going to move to the ex officio members. Do we have anyone on the line from the Department of Transportation?
We do. Good morning, Tiffany and members. I'm Jeannie Wardwaller with Caltrans. I'm our Deputy Director over Planning and Modal Programs. I'm really excited to be here. I'm also joined by one of my lead staff, Amara Susanna Sid, who oversees our Office of Race and Equity. She and I are really looking forward to this. And Caltrans' interest in this group is we have a lot of features on the state highway system, names of facilities, bridges, sections of highway, et cetera, as well as lots of monuments and historical markers that I think, we've been asked already in a number of cases to look at renaming or removing some markers. So we have an interest in coordinating with you, partnering with you, and kind of looking at the criteria for how we do that and being really thoughtful about it. So really appreciate partnering with all of you and being part of this discussion. So thanks for inviting us to sit on the committee in the ex officio capacity.
Yeah, sounds like we have a good partnership ahead of us. And then we've got Select Committee on Native American Affairs.
Yeah, this is Assembly Member James Ramos, interested in the place names of the California Indian people. I also reside on the Samuel Indian Reservation. I'm Serrano and Cahuilla. So I'm looking forward to engaging in the dialogue for the geographical names in the state of California.
Great. We look forward to your input. And Legislative Black Caucus.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janelle Jackson, and I am one of the consultants for the California Legislative Black Caucus. Thank you for inviting us to be part of the ex officio membership of the committee. I'm standing in today. We will be identifying a member of the caucus to represent on the committee. So thank you.
Great, thanks for joining us. The Latino Legislative Caucus.
And this is Lizzie, I'll chime in. Assembly Member Luz Rivas will be representing that position, but unfortunately was unable to make today's meeting.
Okay, thanks, Lizzie. How about the Asian Pacific Island Legislative Caucus? Islander, excuse me. Do we have anybody, excuse me, from the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus? Okay, we'll move on to the Legislative LGBTQ Caucus.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fraker. I'm the Senate consultant for the Legislative LGBTQ Caucus, standing in today for Senator Susan Eggman. She couldn't make it today, but will be on future meetings. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for being here. Legislative Women's Caucus. Do we have anyone from the Legislative Women's Caucus? Okay, I'm just going to back up to the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. Is anyone there from that group? Or the Women's Caucus? Okay. So it sounds like we've got a great turnout today. And also I would like to acknowledge the support that we've received from Avital Barnia from the Transportation Agency. Avital, are you here?
Hi, Tiffany. I'm here. I'm Avital Barnea with the California State Transportation Agency. Excuse me.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
James, next slide, please. We also have advisors, some longstanding advisors that have been incredibly helpful. So I'd just like to acknowledge them. So from United States Geological Survey, Carol, I know you're here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Carol Ostergren. I'm in Santa Cruz, California, and I serve as an advisor and National Geospatial Program representative for California, Nevada. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Carol. I know we have a lot of empty places on our advisors role, so I'm going to zip through a couple of these because I'm not sure if we have anybody. Do we have anybody from the BLM? Don't believe we do. BLM, last call. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. But we do have someone from the United States Forest Service who's been a longtime advisor.
Yes, we do. This is Rich Spradling, and I'm the federal advisor for the U.S. Forest Service, and I've been on the committee 103 years now. And actually, 37-year career with the Forest Service. Was on the Geographic Names Committee back in the 1980s, and then became Geospatial Services Program Manager for many years and ran the mapping programs for the Forest Service in California. And recently I retired and after 37 years and volunteered my services back for Geographic Names just to keep me out of trouble and keep my hand in because of the innate interest I have in this stuff. Yeah. Other than that, the first thing, just last little comment, Forest Service has 20% of the land in the state of California, but about 50% of the geographic names proposals.
Yes.
So thanks.
Interesting little tip there. Thanks, Rich. And National Park Service, I'm almost certain we don't have anybody from the Park Service. Then we have our Emeritus advisors who we've got Jim Trumbley, who's been with us for a long time, and he'll be speaking later this morning. Jim Trumbley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jim Trumbley, and I've been on the committee since 1980 when I was appointed. I worked for State Parks in their Natural Resources Division my whole career, and I retired at the end of 2009, and I've stayed on as an advisor. So I've had a long interest in geographic names, and I'm going to speak a little bit later on some of the history of the committee.
Great, thanks, Jim. And then is Will Patterson here?
Yeah.
Great.
Hi, Tiffany.
Well, hi, Will.
Oh yeah, Will Patterson, past member, GIS and mapping specialist. Yeah, thanks for keeping me on as a advisor. Just remain interested and happy to help out with any GIS and mapping related research if needed.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for being here. Are there any other Emeritus advisors out there that I've missed? Okay, well, great. Next slide, please. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our Secretary of California Natural Resources Agency, who's really been the mastermind and energy behind bringing the awareness and diversity and resources to this committee through this new charter. So personally, I'd like to thank you, Wade, and thank you for your efforts. So Wade Crowfoot, please take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Tiffany, and huge thanks to you and so many others in this meeting that have been doing this good work for a very long time, and quietly and diligently. What I wanted to do with my time by way of introduction is, one, of course, welcome those folks who are at their first committee meeting. I want to share a little bit of context about the committee and our recent efforts to reinforce it and overhaul it. And then I want to end with some thank yous. So for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. In particular, I want to recognize Assemblymember Ramos. who has been a steadfast partner with the governor, focused on building stronger co-equal partnerships between tribal governments, tribal communities, and the state government. I also want to recognize our state librarian, Greg Lucas, and his team for really leaning in on this, both for your presence, Mr. Lucas, here today, and for all that your team's done. I want to also acknowledge peers of mine in the Newsom administration, Transportation Secretary David Kim and Caltrans Director Tokso Mashakin, who have been real partners in recent months, working to elevate and overhaul this effort that we're involved in. And then lastly, just an acknowledgement of Susan Anderson, our wonderful historical curator at the California African American Museum. One point of pride I have in being the Natural Resources Secretary is to support the California African American Museum as part of our agency based in Los Angeles' Exposition Park. So many folks here. And then of course, thank you so much to the representatives representing our legislative caucuses here today. It is an impressive gathering. So let me provide context, at least from where I sit, of why I'm so excited that we're here today and really ushering in a new chapter of the committee. So this committee is a long-standing official body within the Natural Resources Agency, and it has served as an advisory body to a similar federal entity that ultimately designates official names for places and geographic features in California and throughout the country. And I, speaking for myself, but probably for others, I, before this process, had no idea how places or features got their name. And as it turns out, it's through a thoughtful and careful process of consultation between states and the federal government is why we open up a map and actually see these place names. And as they change, it's this committee, as well as its federal equivalent, that are really seminal in considering the changes to the names of places. So there were a few precipitating factors that really caused or generated our interest in getting involved and helping this committee be more than it has been. The first, of course, was the governor's formal apology to tribal governments and communities that he provided almost 2 years ago for what was a state-supported policy of genocide against our tribal communities that have been stewarding our what we know as California since time immemorial. That apology was obviously symbolically powerful and important, but equally important is actually following up with actions that demonstrate that we're ushering in a new era of partnership between tribal communities and the state. So we in our agency have been really interested in finding ways to actually honor that new partnership that we're building. Second precipitating factor was, of course, protests that evolved across the country against systemic racism and police violence last year. That really created a moment of reckoning in all of our institutions and certainly our own agency around what has been our role in perpetuating systemic injustice, and how can we avoid simply being neutral on that question and then be proactive to redressing injustice and inequity. And then the third precipitating factor was actually a recommendation that came through this committee, and that was a request to change the name of a peak in Alpine County in our Sierra Nevada from Jefferson Davis Peak to a Washoe place name identified by the tribe that had inhabited that part of what we know as California, to the name of Dayak Gao Goet, which means saddle between points. And the governor actually caught wind of this request and thought it was a really important change to figure in on. Turns out Jefferson Davis has no connection to the history of Alpine County. There's no significance to his name naming that mountaintop, except for the fact that those who named the mountaintop were Confederate sympathizers. And so the governor felt like it was actually important to figure in and to support this committee's recommendation to the federal government to change the name to that place name identified by the Washoe tribe. And that place name was changed. And the governor actually issued a public statement when that place name was changed, And if I can, I want to bring up on my phone momentarily what he said about that, because I think it's actually pretty powerful. In his quote was as follows. In the governor's letter recommending that change, he wrote, "I will continue to work with state agencies on evaluating the names of features and facilities on public lands to ensure that they are free of associations with discrimination and violence, and will task Californians with recommending names that better reflect the rich diversity, history, and the values of this state. While we cannot undo the wrongs of our past, we can recognize them, tell the truth about our history, and commit to building a more equitable and just future for all. Making these changes may be symbolic, but they're an important recognition of our commitment to equity and racial justice." And so really with that spirit, we've spent the last several months working with many of you to really strengthen this process. And it embodies the legislature and the governor's shared commitment to a California for all, to ensure that all Californians actually see themselves and their culture and their history represented in the places that they visit and live in California. So building off what was a really strong foundation of years of work by many in this discussion here today, we've suggested some what we think are important changes. The first is, of course, to broaden the composition of this body, to include more voices to ensure the broad representation of groups across California. So huge thanks if you are somebody who is representing a group that is new to this committee. We're working to expand public understanding and transparency of this process so that more people actually understand how these changes are made, and more people can actually provide input as they see fit on these changes. And then importantly, to build capacity to support this process. Now, obviously, these are consequential decisions that require assessment, analysis of history and decisions made in the past. So they require staff time on research. And it's remarkable that the existing members of this committee spent a lot of their own time on top of their day jobs, as it were, to actually propel forward recommendations of the federal government. Well, thanks to the California Library, thanks to the Native American Heritage Commission, we actually now have staff capacity to follow up on the work of this committee, do the research to support your decision making. And we're really excited about that. And to institutionalize these changes, working with Tiffany and others, we've established the first charter for this committee that makes very clear its structure and its process. And big thanks, Tiffany, for continuing to serve as our acting chair of this committee. As I understand it, you've agreed to serve as acting chair, getting us through this year. Beginning next year at the first meeting, this committee will elect a chair to preside over the committee. And of course, the charter enumerates what that chair does, including leading these meetings. So let me just say that I'm personally really passionate about the work of this committee. I think it's going to take some time for everybody to really understand the role of this advisory committee, and the process it plays in this fairly deliberative and frankly sometimes slow process. And I really look to existing committee members to spend time today really just level setting, helping us all understand how this committee can operate and actually be a vehicle for achieving the equity that I know we all are committed to across California. So again, welcome, thank you. Lastly, I'll say a big thanks to my colleague, Lizzie Williamson. Tiffany gave me perhaps too much credit of spearheading all this work. I think maybe I was I lit the flame, but Lizzie's been doing a lot of the work, or most of the work, actually helping to set this up. So big thanks, Lizzie and Tiffany, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot, for taking the time to be here today. And I do have to echo my thanks to Lizzie. She's been amazing. Put a lot of work into this new format. So before we move into the nuts and bolts of the new process, I want to back up and just give Avital Barnia from the Transportation Agency a moment to introduce herself and say a few words.
Thank you, Tiffany. Secretary Kim wishes that he could have been here today. As I said earlier, I'm Avital Barnea. I'm Deputy Secretary of Transportation Planning at the California State Transportation Agency. And here just to give a few remarks on behalf of Secretary David Kim. So some of you may be aware that last summer, following the murder of George Floyd, Secretary Kim released a public statement on racial equity, justice, and inclusion in transportation. And that statement really just notes that at CalSTA, we strongly condemn systemic racism and acknowledge that many transportation decisions of the past had a devastating impact on communities of color. And we have a responsibility to own up to that. The statement goes on to say that if we truly want to enhance quality of life, we need to make sure that transportation systems are designed and delivered in a way that provides equitable and safe access to opportunity, especially for people of color and disadvantaged communities. And we commit that we're going to be part of that solution. So the statement was well received, but as we know, words are only as loud as the actions behind them. And we know that it's on us to back up those words with action. And the efforts that this committee will undertake to recommend renaming or removing transportation infrastructure or monuments are actions that we can take in supporting the advancement of racial equity. At CalSTA, Secretary Kim is trying to create a culture where just about everything we do is done through an equity lens. And that means fully integrating equity, justice, and inclusion when it comes to transportation planning, decision-making, delivery, and even the names that we give our transportation infrastructure. So with that, I'm happy to be here today. I know that Secretary Kim wishes that he could have been here himself, but we all stand behind the important work that this committee of the California Advisory Committee on Geographic Names is undertaking. So thanks for having me.
Great, appreciate those words. And I just want to give anyone one last chance to speak up before we move on. I think a couple more people may have joined us and missed the roll call. So if you have some words you'd like to say, it's be a great time. Did Christina Snyder join us? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on. People will probably have a chance to say something at the end of the presentations too. So can we get the next slide, please? So I'm just gonna briefly give an overview of the new charter. I think Secretary Crowfoot did a much better job than I could. So I'll just say a couple more things about it. The last time there was any adjustments made to the California Committee on Geographic Names rules was in 1997. And even back then, the changes weren't very big. So it's time for a little freshening up or overdue. So basically what the charter does is identifies the vetting process for the geographic name proposals submitted to the USGS Board of Geographic Names. And then it also clarifies the roles and responsibilities and terms of engagement for the California Committee of Geographic Names. And it updates the committee composition. And this is one of the bigger changes in the committee itself. So we are going from 5 members to 8 voting members. And the committee's always relied on our advisors for outreach and advice, and they've always been an excellent resource. But now we also have these ex officios members, so that's going to make our community much more diverse, which is great. And then, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, we're striving to support the Governor's Executive Order 91519. That acknowledges the wrongs done to the Native Americans throughout the history of the state. And so the charter takes another step towards honoring Native Americans and their culture by being inclusive and bringing them into the decision-making process. So next slide, please. So now I would like to introduce a speaker who's really well qualified to give us the historical perspective of this committee. As he mentioned, he was on the committee for 20 years, starting in 1980, and he's been advising us for 10 years after retiring from the California Department of State Parks and Recreation. He chaired the committee twice. Each chair is a 2-year stint. So that's a big commitment. And he's also represented the state at least 3 different times at the national meetings that are generally held annually. So I'd like to welcome Jim Trumbull.
Okay. Well, I don't know where to start other than when I first started on this committee in 1980, it took me a long time to try to really get comfortable with making decisions about names. And I spent a lot of time studying some of the name decisions that had been made. And gradually, I think I became more confident about the role we play and how to advise on particular naming issues. So I was looking at your charter, and it talks about this committee forming in the middle 1960s. And I joined in 1980, so it was about 15 years later. But I want to go back and start at the predecessor to this committee and give you just a real thumbnail of our committee was not the first time that we had a geographic names committee in California. The California Geographic Board was formed in 1928, and it was at the suggestion or urging of the chair of the National Committee, BGN, who approached the state and tried to get us to form a board or a committee to advise the federal government on their names on maps. And what was happening at about that time was a lot of mapping had been going on at the federal level starting around 1900 with the quadrangle series. And there was a lot of names, and there were multiple names for the same features, and there were misspellings, there were errors. There was just a lot of problems, and there was no standardized list of names. And so the committee was formed, and the governor appointed 5 people that were both private citizens as well as government employees. And it included a university professor from UC Davis, Tracy Storer, a famous naturalist, has written books on the Sierras, an attorney from Los Angeles, and who also was a historian, an accountant from Berkeley who was also a historian on the side, and 2 county librarians, one from San Diego and one from Fresno. And over the next 15 years, they brought considerable stability to the names in California. And I want to just give you just a couple of examples. The word Mojave was spelled with an H and with a J on different federal maps. And so that committee resolved that, and as you know, chose the J spelling of Mojave. And if any of you have, another example, if any of you have driven across the Bay Bridge from Oakland to San Francisco, you know about midway, you go onto an island and then off again quickly. That was known as Goat Island on some federal maps and as Yerba Buena Island on other federal maps. And in fact, in 1915, both names occurred on 2 different quadrangles produced by the USGS. So that committee resolved that type of an issue as well. They also supervised the selection of a lot of new names in California, acted on proposals of these names, and named several peaks for well-known Californians at the time. They also published catalogs and gazetteers and supervised the first edition of, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Goody's California Place Names, which is sort of a large dictionary of the origin of a lot of names in California, including county names and as well as geographic features. And maybe I should just inject one thing here that I don't know if you were going to talk about it, Tiffany, but there are two groups of names from the standpoint of the Board on Geographic Names. There are administrative names, and then there are geographic names. Our committee has been dealing with geographic names and not administrative names. So for example, the city of Sacramento is an administrative name. Sacramento County is an administrative name. The Sacramento River is a geographic name. And a lot of times these names coincide, but we focus primarily on geographic names. So this organization, this group, the Geographic Board, tried several times to get legislative enactment of a board to do this type of work. They were never successful, and they made several attempts. All worked as volunteers. They were organized underneath the Department of Education in cooperation with the state library. Anyway, it finally dissipated during World War II with a lot of retirements, and that was the end. But it really accomplished a lot and brought a lot of stability to the namescape of California. The current committee, which started in the 60s, which is in your charter, was also started through the impetus of the chair of the Board of Geographic Names at the time, who approached the state geologist, Ian Campbell. And Ian Campbell worked with the chair, and they tried to get legislation passed again in California, and it failed. So the committee was set up in the Resources Agency in 1963, and has been there ever since. I also want to inject that our neighbors surrounding us all have legislatively enacted boards, including Nevada and Arizona, and even Washington, the state of Washington. Oregon's board has been in existence for over 100 years, but we've never been successful in having legislation create a board. And those boards oftentimes include quite a few private citizens as well as government employees. But the current committee is now completely state employees, and that's quite different than the first attempt at naming. So you kind of know the history of the first departments that were involved in the committee. There was one that wasn't mentioned. It was Harbors and Watercraft. They were later combined with state parks. DNOD, where they were known as DNOD for quite a while. But then forestry came along later, and state lands was involved. So one of the first things they did is put out a geographic names handbook, and it almost parroted the existing policies at the federal government at the time. So we didn't, there was only a few policies that were a little bit different than those of the federal government, but we mostly, as time went along, we became more and more familiar with and working with the federal policy. So during the first 10 years I was on the committee in the 1980s, it was a very busy time because they were completing the 7.5-minute quad series. And it was such that there were certain parts of the state that we had an enormous workload, and we were meeting 4 times a year. The North Coast in the early 80s, and then the mid 80s, it was the Southern Sierras, and then in the later 80s, that expanded to the desert areas, and that's when they finished the entire quad series for the state of California, which is now part of the national map. But it was a very busy time, and a lot of the names that appeared on our docket list were names that were in local use, but not on the maps, or the names that were in local use were in conflict with the names on the map. And a lot of these were descriptive type names. There were some commemorative, and those we spent more time on, but it was a very busy time. Our chair was Bud Uzes of State Lands. He was very good. He wrote the textbook basically on the history of surveying in California. But anyway, as time went along in the 90s, things tapered off to more of the level of names that we see now. And we started meeting only twice a year. And we also developed the chair rotation because none of us were getting a lot of support from our departments because of the budget constraints at the time. And almost all the work that I did on the committee was done after hours or on weekends. And that wasn't atypical. There was a lot of people on the committee that were spending time in the off hours just because the places we worked weren't necessarily positive about spending time on something that wasn't part of their responsibility as they saw it. So it was difficult, but the people that stayed on the committee and did the work were very interested in geographic names. So that was good. Our advisors have always been very helpful. In fact, a real shout out to the Forest Service because so many of our names are in the rural areas or in the wildlands. And the Forest Service has access to local superintendents, I guess, I don't know what they call them, regional foresters or district foresters, but they have people on the ground that can go out and evaluate the situation and report back. So we've always gotten a good cooperation and help from the U.S. Forest Service. BLM for many years was looking up old land records and helping us quite a bit, but they no longer on there. We approached the Native American Heritage Council and tried to get them to, at the time, and get involved with the committee. And they did for a while. It was about a year and a half, and then they stopped attending. And then we also had a volunteer historian, a member of the Conference of California Historical Societies, and he was very helpful in sorting out historical societies. You know, some are more authentic than others. And so he was very good at giving, he was kind of a traffic control person, helping us go to where we needed to go to get historical background on some of these names. So it was, he was very helpful. It lasted for about 3 years, and I don't know if it was health reasons, but he stopped coming. So it's been up and down, and we've had times when we've had a lot of help and other times where it's not so challenging. I mean, it's not as easy. I want to talk just a little bit about the complexity of some of the issues that we deal with. The most challenging to me have always been the commemorative names and the commercial names. And we've had public attendance at our meetings, not very often, but if we do, it's for one of those two types of names that we typically get attendance at our meetings. And we've had at some of our meetings, we've had both people speaking for and against the proposal in the same room, which can lead to some interesting discussions. And we've had this for both a commemorative name where some people were not, in fact, didn't like the person, and people that thought the person was great. And then we've also had the same situation in the wine country. In fact, we've had attorneys from both sides. And as you probably know, wines have appellations and other things that make wines more valuable. And so there's money involved, and they can get very, interested or very strongly, they have strong opinions about a lot of the names or changing the names. So they can be complicated at times. But the most memorable meeting we had back in the early 80s, 83, was a commemorative name for an avalanche victim at Alpine Meadows. And the place was packed and it was very emotional. And anyway, I don't want to get off into that story, but it was a very interesting name that lasted for a couple of years. And whatever. I think the most important thing that I can offer is the need to really understand the PPP, which is the principles, policies, and procedures of the Board on Geographic Names with respect to naming. It actually takes more than knowing the PPP. It's also a good judgment about a lot of these policies are not clear cut. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. We get a lot of names, or we've had quite a few names where there is a historical name, an older name, and a name that's in local use or common use. And it's not always the case that the older name has precedence and we stick with the older name. Sometimes it makes more sense to go with common use for the sake of facilitating communication. And it's a judgment call. And knowing what we've done with past cases is important in creating some sense of standardization or consistency about what we do. So we've had quite a few of those. And the commemorative names, we have to weigh the contributions of the individual and or their association with the feature, and it depends on the name. But consistency with past cases is very important. And then there's also wilderness names. That policy used to be very contentious because there is a policy that says there'll be no new names in wilderness unless there's an overriding need. But the federal policies don't go very far in telling you more than that. They say it has to be a reason of safety, administration, or education, but they don't explain what they mean by education. It comes down to the judgments of the committee as to what constitutes an educational reason for overriding reason for putting a new name or changing a name in wilderness areas. I guess changing a name would be okay, but putting a new name in wilderness would be a problem. Derogatory names has been a small part of our work, but we've always had a few coming in now and then. And in recent years, there's been an uptick, and there's been more names, particularly the squaw name, that have come to us. And these can be very time consuming. They're not necessarily complicated. I think the committee has been very consistent and strong in recognizing that, okay, these are derogatory names. They need to come off of the map. And that's the easy part. The hard part is getting unanimity and under agreement on a replacement name. And that can be very complicated. And sometimes the counties get involved, and they sometimes hold public hearings about what the replacement name should be. So it's not always up to the proponent that suggested that the name needs to be taken off the map because it's derogatory. It oftentimes falls to the counties or the local governments that will get involved. Not all the times, but sometimes. I would say out in the forested areas, less so, like the one that was mentioned by Mr. Crowfoot, was in Alpine County, and that was a very copacetic, you might say. But in some of the more urban areas, there's oftentimes people with different ideas as to what the replacement name should be. So just a forewarning that they can take more time, and they are difficult sometimes with respect to well, we've had problems with getting responses back, and that is another problem that we have oftentimes with some of these names. Hopefully that'll get better, and it's great that the committee has more people that can reach out and help us in getting the information and responses that we need on some of these names. I wanted to share with you, if you can see the scene behind me, I wanted to share one case with you just to give you an idea. It's not always, a lot of our names can be very dry type of work unless you're really into maps and really into names. You know, it's very dry, but there are occasional names that come along that are very interesting and sometimes very rewarding. And this is one that I had, And so the scene behind you is, I'm going to tell you a little story about this particular name, but in 1871, some convicts at the Carson City Penitentiary in Nevada escaped. There was 29 of them, and they split up into groups and just scattered. And a group of them, about 7, headed south towards, what was Aurora. They murdered a mail carrier and then moved into California. The word got down to Benton, which is in southern Mono County. A posse was formed, and they went after a group of convicts, and they were pursued up into this mountain range right here. There's a canyon, and there was gunfight, and the convicts were eventually apprehended. There was 3 of them that were caught there, and 2 people were killed. And the canyon that this happened in, the lake there became named Convict Lake. And if any of you have traveled down 395, you've been to Convict Lake. It's a beautiful lake. It's right there on the eastern escarpment. But when the federal maps came out in 1914 for this area, the highest peak in that area was Mount Morrison, named for the one of the 2 people that were killed in the gunfight capturing these convicts. And that is on the skyline on the right-hand side. The highest peak there on the rim is Mount Morrison. In the 1980s, a gentleman named Bill Stone, working as a Forest Service employee, seasonal employee at the Mammoth Lakes Visitor Center, had become very familiar with the history of the area as part of his job, and had learned about the Convict Lake story and about Mount Morrison. And as he read, he found out that the other person killed was a Paiute Indian named Mono Jim. And Mono Jim was killed as well. And so he felt that it was only proper that feature should be named for him in the area. So it came to our committee, and I was the one that was working on it. And I talked to the proponent, and through the help of the Forest Service, we were trying to find out if Mono Jim had an Indian name. Did he go by Mono Jim, or did he have another name as well? And it was 100 years after the event, and there was some contact with some of the Paiute people in the area, and they said they only knew him as Mono Jim. And in the research I've done in the area, there was quite a few Paiute Indians that had very Anglo names. There was a name that I uncovered that was a meadow named Jackson Meadow, that was named for Dave Jackson, who was a packer that worked for Lloyd Summers in the Mammoth Lakes area. And there's a meadow named after him. He was a Paiute Indian. So we decided to stick with Mono Jim, and it went through, and it was named. So if you look at this picture, you can see Mount Morrison, the highest peak. There is a darker mountain in front of it. It's a little bit lower, but it's quite prominent. And I don't have a different angle right now, but that is Mono Jim Peak. And it was approved by the Board on Geographic Names in 1987. The work was done here between 83 and 86. So I just wanted to share that. And then I have just 2 comments that I want to make about the geographic names work. Every year there's an annual meeting of names authorities from the states with the federal government, the BGN, the Board on Geographic Names, Domestic Names Committee, and its staff. And at first, in California, it was called the Western States Geographic Names Conference. And every year the board came out to the Western states, and it held one of its 12 meetings. It meets once a month at the Western Names meeting. And I attended the one in 1984. Later, that was expanded to the entire United States, and it's called COGNA. It's the Council on Geographic Names Authorities. I wanted to mention it because it's not in your charter, but I feel that it's really important. It was a great educational opportunity. You actually can see what happens at this conference is the hosting state holds one of their board meetings and talk about the names cases in their state. So you can actually see another board and how they operate. Also, the U.S. Board on Geographic Names Domestic Names Committee holds a meeting at this conference. And so you can actually see the whole process through the end. It's the only meeting they hold outside of Washington, D.C. There is also a roundtable discussion in which policies, procedures, and current issues in naming are discussed between the feds and the states. And it was during that period of time that a lot of the vetting and discussion of the policy that is in the PPP was brought to those meetings, and the states participated in some of the development of some of those policies, or at least commenting and reflecting on some of those policies. So it was a very good discussion. Also, states get to talk to other states about how they do. So anyway, California hosted in 1984. Our committee hosted that was the Western states, and then COGNA in 2003 was held in California. Our committee hosted it in the Monterey at Asilomar, and it was attended by states from around the United States, as well as the national board people. We haven't really attended in the last few years, and it's real regrettable. It's because of lack of funds, but I behoove any of you that are really interested in the committee and the names that you could learn a lot by going there and watching what happens at COGNA. I'm hopeful that Oregon, who was going to host this last year when COVID came, and I had to cancel. I've been to 7 of these, but I think Oregon's going to try to host in 2022. They have an outstanding board, and so I recommend that you consider that if you can.
Jim, I'm going to just chime in. I do want to do a bit of a time check because I know we have some presentations on the process that we also need to go through. So I'm going to ask if you can spend maybe just a minute or two to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
Right. I just want to say that the BGN reaches out to tribes and to counties, local government, but they also reach out to our committee, of course. And I think that what our committee says is very important, and in ways they rely heavily on our committee to sort this stuff out. We always wait for the opinions of the other groups that have been contacted, and we also evaluate it through the lens of the policy and procedures that they have. And I think that stands for a lot in creating consistency from case to case on names. So that's it.
Great, thank you, Jim. I hope you as committee members out there got a good sense, or at least some kind of sense of what it's like to be in the room during our committee meetings after Jim's stories. They're great stories. And I feel like that's one of the big reasons why I enjoy this committee so much is the stories behind the namings. And hopefully someday we'll all be able to get together in person again and have lunch with Jim and Rich so we can hear more about the historical cases. Oh, I do want to mention, if anyone has questions during this meeting, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand and I'll try and catch those. Okay, so next slide. Next step is our national counterpart. Jenny's got a wide range of perspective and knowledge of naming geographic features from working with all the states across the nation. And of course, they all have their unique issues. So each committee member will absolutely get to know her as you sit on the committee. And she's great. She's always makes herself available to our questions and inquiries. So Jenny Runyon, you're up.
Okay. Thank you, Tiffany. Hopefully you can hear me now. And wow, what can I say? How can you follow on after Jim? I mean, he really, like I said, telling the stories, he puts a human face on these names on the landscape, and it's just amazing to hear got, 40 years of history that he's seen firsthand with this California committee. So it's just a thrill to be here. And, several of the folks here I've known for many, many years and worked with them, of course, Tiffany and Saul and even Jane from Water Resources have been in communication. Rich Bradling, of course, from Forest Service, quite a few other members. I've been on the staff, the research staff for the US Board on Geographic Names, coming up on 27 years. So I have attended at least many of those same conferences that Jim alluded to. I think I've been to 18 now over the years. I will say before I forget, if I go any further, that you hear us talk about the US Board on Geographic Names, and Jim alluded to our acronym BGN. We Fed, so we love our acronyms. So if I use the board or BGN, it's the same thing, just interchangeable. We get lazy with our acronyms. I'm also going to introduce just by name here real quick, my colleague, Matt O'Donnell, who's been with USGS for many, many years also, and he will probably be the one that many of you will hear from directly, in that he is the primary caseworker for these individual proposals that we receive. I do more of these sort of oversight to the policy discussions, briefings, obviously. I acknowledge all the proposals that come in, but then I get to punt them over to Matt to do all the heavy lifting and all the research. So you'll be hearing from either myself or from Matt as we get into some of the individual proposals that we receive. So with that, we've put together a slideshow here. Again, it's hard to follow Jim. I don't have a lot of cool mountain pictures or even stories. Again, being feds, being a board, a committee, lots of policy, dry text. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to zip through them pretty quickly. A few of them Jim already sort of touched on. So given that this is being recorded and you will have reference to the slide deck at your leisure, I apologize if you can tell I talk fast. I can get through these hopefully pretty quickly. I don't want to run out of everybody's time. So with that, I guess next slide. Got to start with the history, right? I mean, follow on with Jim's example there. And the BGN been around since 1890. We had our 125th celebration a few years ago now, established by executive order by President Benjamin Harrison. And you think about the 1890s, this is the time of a lot of westward expansion, a lot of mapping. USGS had been established to do federal mapping in the 1870s. As Jim said, there was a lot of confusion. There was maps being created and people going out and coming back to DC with their maps and reports, and it was pretty obvious there were conflicting names. So President Harrison decided it was time to form this board made up of members that would get together, just as your committee is doing now, to resolve discrepancies, review proposals. There was a lot less interaction back then with the public. It was really more between federal agencies. But nonetheless, there was a need to form this committee. And really, 131 years later, we're still at it. There was a spell during World War II when foreign names were the real focus of the BGN, and domestic names kind of took a back seat for a while. So in 1947, the public law, the Congress reestablished the current BGN basically to promulgate decisions with respect to geographic names and to basically establish principles, the fancy words here, nomenclature and orthography. The BGN essentially acts as the federal authority for all name discrepancies, inquiries, and of course, new name and name change proposals. Next. The BGN is made up of two standing committees. We're primarily obviously the domestic names. We also have a foreign names committee that handles the rest of the world. They don't make decisions per se, but they record names from foreign countries for federal use. And we have executive committee that handles, bylaws, and we have committees on communication, and we have a Native American names and tribal communication special committee, which I know will be of great interest to this group. And you'll see there below the list of all the federal agencies that serve on the Domestic Names Committee right now. You've heard mention of the Forest Service and BLM and the Park Service, and USGS has membership, but there's others, BIA and Fish and Wildlife Service. So before I forget, I should clarify, in Tiffany's introduction, you referred to us as the USGS Board of Geographic Names. USGS is just one voting member agency on the BGN. It's very much an interagency board. Yes, USGS provides the staff support. That's where Matt and I work, and the executive secretary, but the fact is it's an interagency. It's really the US Board on Geographic Names. Next. So in a nutshell, a lot of this is what Jim already talked about, and also Tiffany and even Secretary Crowfoot mentioned this too, is basically we're here to consider proposals, new names, name, spelling, or location changes. The latter being, you've got the right name, it's just on the wrong peak, so we need to move it. That's a proposal. We get proposals from the general public, from various local organizations, and then various state and local and tribal governments, federal agencies, and others. The underlining there is very important. We are a reactive board. We don't go looking for issues. We don't go looking for names to change. We don't go looking for unnamed features to be named. We can only respond to and react to proposals submitted to us. So it's important to point out to your users, to your customers, your clients, your stakeholders that if somebody wants to change a name, they've got to initiate a proposal. We're not just saying it needs to change a name is not suffice. We have an online and a PDF sort of hard copy application form that the applicant can complete and send back to us. We can demo that another time if you need to. So once we get a proposal and once the staff has done its preliminary research, we prepare a case brief. It goes on the quarterly review list. And that's sort of the signal for the outreach to begin. That's when we start our consultation with local governments, cities, counties, towns, with the State Geographic Names Authority. So there's your California Advisory Committee right there. We consult with state or federal land management agencies. So again, if it's on Forest Service land, that 20% that Rich alluded to, we consult with the Forest Service, national parks, of course. We consult with tribal governments, and I'll get into that more later, historical preservation officers, and others that we feel might have an interest in the matter. I think Tiffany or maybe Jim mentioned that we do meet monthly to consider these proposals. So once the staff feels like a name is ready for a vote, it goes on the monthly docket. And again, present day local use and acceptance is what we're looking for. What do the local people think? We're sitting here in DC. We don't really have a lot of stake in what a name should be. It's the local residents who have to live with the results of our decisions. So we want to hear from those local people. Next. Standards, this is a blurb from the Standards Association on why it's important to have a standardized name. We'll get into more a little bit later. So next. We already talked about the importance of state names authorities. Just about each state has a names advisory board or committee. You all are members automatically of this Council of Geographic Names Authorities that Jim mentioned. There's some information on the website. There's a link there at the bottom. And of course, California is one of those member states. Next. Again, I mentioned each proposal is added to the monthly docket for discussion and the final decision. It's probably important to note that California is an advisory committee. Your decisions are not binding to state government. They're only official once the US BGN has approved them. And most of the time, of course, we do agree with the state, but every once in a while we'll contradict you. So we can talk about that another time. If the name is approved, whether it's a new name or a change, it goes into the Geographic Names Information System. You'll learn a lot about this GNIS. It's our official names database. I've got some slides shortly to show you those. We consider approximately 250, 300 cases a year nationwide. And they're typically about a dozen or so on each monthly docket. And as soon as we finish those dozen, another dozen have come in before the next monthly meeting. So it's a constantly rotating cycle of new proposals and ones ready for a vote. The entire process, we say, can take 6 to 8 months. To be honest, it's often quite a bit longer, up to a year, sometimes even more. As Jim said, there's so many factors go into the decision. and each proposal is considered case by case. The fact is, if it was that simple and that straightforward, you wouldn't need a board or an advisory committee. You could just plug in the facts and it would spit out the results. It doesn't work that way in geographic names. They're so subjective, so emotional, so personal. Everyone is unique. And that's what makes it fun, or challenging, should we say. Next, please. Again, Jim has alluded again to our principles, policies, and procedures. You'll hear us talk about the PPP. It's on our website. These are kind of the big, sort of almost like mission statements. Names must be in the Roman alphabet. Recognize names in local use. The only authority higher than the BGN is, of course, Congress or the president through an executive order. If Congress or the president decrees a name that's official, we don't get involved. We just accept it as given to us. And there have been a couple of those in California over the years. Not many, but we remind the congressional staffers that, look, you all created the BGN to handle geographic names for you. You don't need to get involved. But of course, some people feel compelling need to go right to their congressman and bypass the process. But we really prefer that the proposal go through the BGN process. Names established by other authorities, those are those administrative names that Jim mentioned, man-made features. We don't render decisions on school names or parks or trails or library names. I mean, all the names of the man-made structures. We're not going to dictate to the California Department of Education or even the county board what a name of their school should be. So our focus is solely on natural features. So again, we have a little bit of more of a breakdown on that a little bit later. One name for one feature. In other words, there can be one official name only for a geographic feature. There can be multiple variant names, which we do record, but it's only one official name. And principle 6, preservation of names, basically means that once a feature is named, it can only be renamed to something else. You can never unname a feature. And this can come into consideration with offensive names. You might feel inclined to say, well, why can't we just unname the feature, remove it from the landscape, remove it from all maps? No, you've got to replace it with something else. So keep that in mind. Next. The policies, again, I mentioned the first one already about Congress or the president establishing names. We have policies, again, don't belabor all of these, but name changes, commemorative names, again, a little more detail coming up later on these. Jim mentioned wilderness areas. Of course, derogatory and offensive names is likely to be a focus of your committee this coming year or 2 or 10. The issue of diacritic marks on geographic names. We discourage duplicate or similar names in the same area to avoid confusion. Again, I mentioned variant names. Basically, anything that's ever been applied to a feature, no matter how obscure, how misspelled, published on one obscure source in 1925, is still a variant name, which is why we call our database a gazetteer, a geographic dictionary. It's the recording of all the names ever found for that feature, which is really helpful for historical research. It also means that if a name is changed, the former name is retained as a variant so that you can look it up and know what the new name is. We discourage long names. If you're going to have a personal name, surname only, not first, last, middle name, title, just the surname ideally. Or occasionally you might get a first name. You heard Mono Jim Peak as a first name. Tribal geographic names, of course, that in itself is a whole new policy really that's been put in place, or should I say enhanced over the years. So got more on that later. Commercial names, Jim mentioned that we discourage names that clearly promote a business. And we even had to develop an animal names policy because somebody's going to want to name a peak for their dog. And, is it ever appropriate? So we'll talk about that too. So next, please. Again, I mentioned the GNIS, it's our database to promulgate all names for federal use. It was developed 40 plus years ago, of course, from paper gazetteers to a digital environment. It's online. Right now it has about 2.2 million features listed nationwide, users from all walks of life. And it does, again, contains historical and variant name information. And there's the URL at the bottom. Next. The feature name is against the official name, but has a unique feature ID. So even though the name may change, that feature ID remains unique to that one feature. So it's the one thing that keeps it consistent. So we know if we're talking about that particular mud lake or that particular long peak or that particular Bear Creek, it's got unique feature ID so that there's no confusion about all the others with the same name. Again, variant names, only one name is official, BGN standards. Every name in the database has a citation. So we can tell you where we found that name, whether it was a BGN decision, whether it was found in Goody's place name book, whether it was found in a county history, a survey. We can tell you where we found that name. And I think that's sort of unique to this database in that, we can tell you where we got the name from, right, wrong, or indifferent. It might be an obscure source that got it wrong, but it is the official name unless it's changed. Next. So the history of GNIS real quick. We started phase 1. We compiled and collected all the names on the USGS topo maps in the late 70s. Then we collected names from Forest Service and Park Service and NOAA charts. Phase 2, we went state by contract and awarded a contract to collect names from all kinds of other sources. We had the contractor to look at state maps and county maps and historical books and surveys and gathered every name they could possibly find and put it in a database. And then I'm going to talk more again about the administrative names, but we've never been responsible for collecting the names of roads and highways. So that's one thing, we don't even deal with roads and highways at all. So next. This is just a snapshot of the query page, the search page on the GNIS website. I encourage you all to play around with it and do some searches. Here I've selected, California as the state, and a drop-down list for the counties. And you can search by feature class. So there are 64 different feature classes that are kind of broad categories. So all uplifted features, and whether the official name is mountain, knob, peak, hill, range, no, sorry, not range. The other one's mount. Those are all classified in the database as a summit. So if you want to search for all the summits in Sacramento County, you can do that. You don't have to care whether it's named mountain or peak. You can search for all the summits. Same with stream. So whether or not the feature is named, river, creek, branch, fork, brook, run, they're all classified together in the broad category of stream. So again, you can search for all the streams. So again, we can have a whole separate session on a demo of GNIS another time, but next, please. Here's the one that Secretary Crowfoot alluded to earlier. This was a recent decision, of course. This is the change from Jeff Davis Peak. You see down there, it's still a variant name. It's the former name of the feature. So if you were to search Jeff Davis Peak in GNIS, it would redirect you to this new official name, Daek Dao Go Et Mountain, which is the name that was approved. And there you've got the history field with a very short little blurb on the name and what it means and the Washoe origin, and a little bit of description there, the location. The citation in this case was a board decision, July 9th, 2020. The entry date will never change. That's when this feature itself, the mountain itself, was added to the GNIS. That doesn't change. The name may change along the way, but the entry date is back from that original phase 1 collection. And again, the elevation there in feet and meters. Next, and this is just a continuation of the same screenshot. It's hard to do it all on one page without looking too tiny. Again, it shows it was a 2020 BGN decision. It's in Alpine County, and there's the geographic coordinates and the name of the USGS map it appears on. Next. And there's a link off GNIS to our mapping services. So you can see here, this is the Esri base map, and if you click on the little bubble, you get the little box pops up with the feature ID, which we sometimes call the gazetteer ID, the official name, the latitude, longitude, and the cell name, which is the USGS quadrangle. And then down below, you'll see the new name has been applied already to the Forest Service topographic map. So there's your Daek Dao Go Et Mountain on a federal product. Sentinel Rock was approved at the same meeting for sub-peak. Next. And we have a lot of historical records, a lot of old work cards. You see here examples. Those are appended to the GNIS entries if they're available. Very few names in the database actually were BGN decisions. The vast majority have been collected during that phase 1 and phase 2, and they're still equally official, but only a small percentage actually have a BGN decision on them. And if they do, we're likely to have one of these old work cards. And they're fascinating to gather some of the history that Jim mentioned, you know, the name origin and who said what and the actual date it was approved, and just to see the old handwriting. And again, some of these go back to the 1908 and so forth. So a lot of historical material. Next. So basically, what is a geographic feature? Basically, anything on the landscape that needs identification or location. Does it have a name? If so, it should be in GNIS. Sacramento is a populated place. City of Sacramento is the civil division. So they refer to the same thing, but one is the populated place where people may say they live in Sacramento. They really don't. They live sort of outside the official incorporated boundary. So that's more of a nebulous reference to a place that people know as Sacramento. And then you have City of Sacramento, which is the official incorporated legal name. It's a little bit of a nuance there. It's a little hard to explain, but you'll find oftentimes two records for what appear to be the same geographic place. Of course, mountains, rivers, locale. A locale is basically a place of human activity, but no permanent population typically. So that would be a corners, you know, crossroads. But this is the next sort of segue into these administrative cultural man-made features. That's my however. Next. It's hard to see the screen, I realize, but there's a lot of features in GNIS currently for these man-made entities, buildings, schools, parks. Again, we've got trails, police stations, libraries. I mean, it goes on and on and on. These were added. You can see the entry date in the far right there, anywhere from 1981 to 2001 and some more recent. Next, please. The decision was made several years ago that because we have a very, very limited staff at USGS to handle geographic names, it was impossible to keep up with all these changes. You know, you all live in very, you know, urban areas with new schools, new parks, new name changes for parks. It's just impossible to keep up. And so the decision was made, really, to put it bluntly, it was better to have no data than bad, outdated data. So the decision was made that we are going, sometime in the coming year, we're going to strip out all those administrative names from GNIS. They'll no longer be available, no longer searchable. Jeannie mentioned earlier, you talk about you know, bridges and tunnels and transportation features. They may be in GNIS today, woefully out of date already, but they'll be gone before the year is up. So you're gonna have to go elsewhere to find those names. But again, that's a session in itself, probably, is how to handle those. We will retain that information in an old legacy file. It'll be on our website for searching, but really with this massive caveat that it's for historical research and not to be relied on for current administrative names. Now, there are some other USGS programs taking over these, some of these subset of administrative names, boundaries. They'll handle parks. Structures will handle all those buildings that I showed you, and then transportation will handle things like bridges and tunnels and airports and so forth. So again, this is probably a session in itself. And if you're really interested in maintaining some of those administrative features, you can sign up to become a National Map Corps volunteer. It's a crowdsourced program where you can help USGS maintain those, but we will no longer be involved. Next. So again, just echoing really what Jim and Tiffany have said already, the importance of having a state names authority in the process. You provide a local and regional perspective on names. You have access to historical material, usage. You can do so much more research that we can do sitting here in DC. I mean, the web is great, but there's only so much you can find online. Again, you can help us ascertain local use and opinion. You can consult with your state agencies. We prefer not to work with, you know, state parks and state fish and wildlife, fish and game. That's your job as the state committee, is to organize input from your state agencies. You may have connections with your municipal and county governments. Reach out to them to get their input. You provide a forum for public input. You know, people aren't going to travel to DC for a 5-minute presentation on their name proposal, but they might be willing to go to Sacramento and speak to you all in person. Clearly, you contribute to this COGNA annual meeting, this consortium of state names authorities. Certainly, we encourage you wherever possible to attend the annual meeting. As Jim said very well, in-person interaction with us, both the staff and the BGN members, and your counterparts from other states. Lessons learned on what what other states are going through with their names issues. So if you at all possible can find a way to get there, please come. So next, I think I'm almost done, I hope. Well, basically here I just expand again on the policies. So I don't really want to get too into this. I know we're running out of time, I'm sure here. Basically, when it comes to name changes, the BGN is conservative and needs to be a compelling reason to change a name. And again, you have to come up with a replacement name. Commemorative names, nothing for living persons. The honoree must be deceased 5 or more years and should have had an association with that geographic feature or made a contribution to the community or the feature itself. Wilderness, again, no names in wilderness areas unless there's a very strong, compelling reason. Sounds like I need to talk to Jim some more about what some of those compelling reasons might be, but again, it's another day. Next, please. Obviously, a big focus, and one of the reasons why you all have been, reconstituted, shall we say, is this issue of derogatory and offensive names. So as we go through new actual proposals, you'll start to get in some of the reality of what it's like to consider a name change. And basically, the BGN encourages anyone who finds a name to be offensive to submit a proposal. Again, we're not going to initiate it. We will certainly respond and be here to help and guide you through the process, but we are not going to initiate it. Diacritical marks, historically were not allowed on federal maps. Now they are, as long as they're in the Roman alphabet. Names on tribal lands can include other characters as long as they can be rendered in Unicode. Again, avoid duplicate names. Next, please. I've mentioned variant names, long names. I do want to touch on tribal names here momentarily, commercial and animal names. Next. How are we doing for time, Tiffany? Am I cutting it close?
Yes, yeah, if you could wrap it up pretty soon, that'd be great. But this is excellent news, information.
Okay. Well, again, I invite you all to read this at your leisure later. It's a lot to take in, I realize, a lot of policy stuff. So a lot of this is familiar to anybody that's ever dealt with tribal governments and Native American communities and partners. As a federal agency, or a board, we are required, of course, by executive order to recognize the unique relationship with tribal governments as sovereign nations, government to government. So we need to talk a little bit, I think, in future meetings about how much we do to reach out to tribes as the federal government to government, as opposed to letting the states consult with tribes. Obviously, it's very important that you all do, but that may not satisfy the sovereign nation requirement. Again, the recognition of tribes as self-governance, and to be respectful of the historical and cultural relationships that you have with the American landscape, and inviting tribes to participate in the process. Next. Again, executive order I've cited. We have a secretarial order at Department of the Interior, consultation policies. Basically, each quarter, when that quarterly review list is completed and posted online, we send an email notice to all 574 federally recognized tribes and approximately 200 tribal historic preservation offices. We invite them to comment on any name on the quarterly review list. Next. There's really 3 parts to this policy 10 on tribal names. Basically, it comes down to whether you're referring to features that are located entirely on tribal trust lands. If so, the tribe gets to decide what the name is. No formal BGN review. We accept it as official. End of case. If it's entirely off tribal lands, non-tribal lands, then the normal review process applies. Reach out to the counties and states, and tribes are invited to comment. And if they're partly on, partly off, then everybody gets to weigh in also, the same as above. So next. Derogatory offensive names. You've heard mention of the word squaw, came to a lot of people's attention in the early 90s. States have been proactive in their name change efforts. Minnesota kind of led the way, others have followed along. More recently, Nevada and Utah have been, much like you are, sort of addressing a need to be more proactive in eliminating offensive names. Next. Again, names are on the landscape, prefer to proceed cautiously. We're not proactive, case by case. And approximately 420 offensive names have been changed by the BGN in the last 20 some years. So it gives you kind of rough sense of how much we've done and yet how much more there is to do. Next. There we go. Anyone can submit a proposal to the BGN, should include a reason why you think the name is offensive. Again, must offer an alternative. You can't unname a feature. And ideally, the replacement name should retain the original history of the name. Obviously, you want to get rid of the offensive word, but that name carried a story. There was a reason why that name got applied to the feature, whether it was 50, 100, 200 years ago. Find the story, find the history. This is where our state librarians and your state historical folks can dig into the history, the records. Don't just replace everything, please, with bear or elk or freedom or something, safe and innocuous. Try and find it. If it was named for an early African-American family in the area, find their name, put their name on the map instead. If it's a tribal name, put their tribal name on the feature. Don't just try and just erase it easily and quickly. It'll come back to haunt you if you do. Next. Brand new Secretary of the Interior, as of this week, Deb Haaland, has made it her mission to address offensive place names. So much like your governor, we're getting a lot of pressure, or say it's the wrong word, a lot of interest and attention paid to place names on the landscape. And she would like to form a committee to address offensive names and submit recommendations to the BGN, which ultimately will require your review. So be ready. There are going to be a lot of these coming, and they want it all done in 5 years. So you have a task ahead of you. Next. You recognize this, of course, Governor Newsom's statement. Next. There's example again that Secretary Crowfoot alluded to, the Jeff Davis Peak name change, a little timeline there, and the fact that it was changed. And there's one pending related issue at the bottom there is to rename the associated Jeff Davis Creek. So even though the Peak name was addressed and fixed and resolved and changed, the Creek name is still sitting there, and the Washoe would also like to change that to Dalgoet Creek. Actually, there's a mistake there. It should be to Wata instead of the word creek. They want Wata for the Washoe generic term meaning creek. So I apologize, mistake. Next, I think we've got to be done here. Okay, future goals. Continue to increase awareness within all our communities, both state, federal, and Indian country, about our policies. Improve outreach with our state names partners, in consultation on our policies. If we want to talk about something we do you don't understand or appreciate, we'd like to hear from you. And to continue to record names from published sources, including Native American origin, and working with our tribal communities to share their knowledge. Next, hopefully is the last one. Yes, cool. So there's me and Matt and our contact information, and hope to hear from you all. So thank you, Tiffany. Sorry, it takes a while, but hopefully it's helpful.
Oh yes, very helpful. And that was a ton of information, but it's all very applicable, and makes me realize I never saw this presentation when I joined the committee. So this is super helpful for folks that are just coming on board. I think it'll give you a quicker leg up, because a lot of that information that Jenny just talked about, you will have to apply to your cases at some point in time, but it's all documented, and we discuss it as a group.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to show this book that Jim mentioned, the Goody, who no one can pronounce his name, but I have it on my shelf and I refer back to it when I'm looking at cases. So I just had to bring that up because it was sitting right here.
You do too.
Well, thanks so much, Jenny.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So now, actually, Jenny and Jim made my job really easy, because you guys really laid out the process pretty well. I am going to go into more about the vetting process and the process of what the committee goes through for making our recommendations. So you will hear the same information again, perhaps. I apologize, but I'll breeze over it. So next slide, please. Here's just a really brief big picture overview. So the proposal comes to the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, to us, and then we do an initial review, we create a work plan and assign a committee member to that proposal, and then there's outreach and additional review. The case gets presented to the committee in our meetings, and then we vote on a final recommendation, and then it goes back to the BGN, which you'll get very comfortable hearing and saying, because U.S. Board on Geographic Names is a mouthful, so BGN's way easier. Okay, so let's go into a little more detail about how this all works. So before we even meet, the proposal starts at the BGN, where it gets submitted from the proponent, and then Jenny's team does a preliminary research and confirms that it meets their proposal criteria. And then if it does, it gets listed on the BGN quarterly review list and posted on the BGN website. And then at this point, it comes to us. And Kira Healy from the California State Library will capture the new case information and log it into the California Community Geographic Names tracking system, which I'm going to show you in a second. And then Kira will send the new case log to the California Research Bureau, which is part of the state library, for some initial background review and research. So this kind of pre-research could include like geographic name review, the historical connection or association of the proposal to the local area. It might, hopefully they'll identify stakeholders who will want to reach out to for an opinion. And the BGN will also do this, but it's BGN usually does it at a higher level. So they'll contact the federal tribes and the federal agencies at the national level. But we dig deeper into the more local contacts. And then there's going to be some factual based research to be done. So someone, for example, like someone might propose a Native American name for a feature that they claim means a specific thing, like mountain or stream in their language, but does it really mean what they're saying it does? So we need to confirm by contacting the tribe whose language is being proposed and make sure that that word means what the proponent really says it does, so that kind of thing. So we need to validate those proposals. So then the next step is that Kira will prepare an executive summary of the new cases. So basically she'll go in and harvest all the California cases from the big national BGN review list that comes out quarterly. And then the chair will prepare the agenda, which will include a list of what the BGN has already made decisions on between the time of our last meeting and this next meeting coming up. And then those documents will get distributed to the committee members, and we're aiming for at least 10 days before the meeting to give you all a time to review it and prepare and think about the cases that are coming up. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the tracker that we've developed. This is probably still in draft mode. Like we literally just came up with this last week, I think it was, or maybe it was even this week. It's all a blur. But it's pretty solid. I think it's really close to what we're going to work with. So basically there's an overview sheet here that tracks what type of case the proposal is. Is it a new name or is it renaming a feature? Is it a perceived or derogatory or offensive name? Or is it commemorating a person? Is it a historical correction? Just a correction is all it might be. So like maybe a name gets misspelled on a map during a cartographic update 50 years ago, and then every time that map gets updated, that incorrect name gets brought forward in the next map iteration. And then eventually someone comes along and catches that error and wants to fix it. And so they'll propose the original name. Or there might be a name that's just got local usage. So the community's been calling a feature the same thing for years, even though it's not on the map. And so eventually someone wants to put that on the map and make it official. And then there could be other reasons why a proposal comes into, but those are kind of the main ones. Next slide, please. Okay, so then another piece of the tracker is to track our stakeholders. So we take local opinion very seriously. Like Jenny mentioned, they're the ones on the ground. They know the context of this names. So there's a lot of outreach that goes on to local communities to get their opinions. So we need to track that. And so first of all, we need to figure out who we're going to be contacting, such as land managers, tribes, of course, local landowners, and the county board of supervisors is really important because they kind of represent that area. And then we record their contact information. Okay, and the next slide. And then finally, the last part of our tracking log includes a contact log. So we've got the information of who we're going to contact. Now we need to make sure we record the interaction with those people. So we need to record when we tried to reach out to someone. So we might be making phone calls and emails and they don't respond. So we need to record that we actually made an attempt on that communication. And document that. Or if we did reach someone, we need to take notes on that communication. What was your discussion with that stakeholder, and what was their opinion? And then once you start filling this out, it really helps with our decision making, as we can see patterns, or just gives us kind of a really nice overview of what the local opinion is. Okay, next slide. And then, so we've got all this information, and then we meet. And actually, there's kind of two parallel things going on. There's the continuing cases, but I'm focusing more on the new cases that are coming in that haven't been discussed yet. So at that point, when we meet, either Kira or the chair will introduce the new cases to you at the meeting. And then as a committee, we'll discuss and weigh in on the next steps for that proposal process. So that could include who needs to be contacted for opinion. And some of this is already done for us through the library, but there might be some different perspectives on more stakeholders that need to be reached out to. Any further research that maybe the Research Bureau hadn't considered, we can make that offer. And then, of course, our ex officio outreach. So our ex officio members may have contacts and networks that can support a case that we didn't even know about. So, for example, the Legislative Black Caucus might have connections to find out historical connections to Negro Bar at Folsom, which is on our proposal docket right now to be renamed to Freedom Bar. So we need to understand the history of that Negro Bar. Who was that Negro? And then the chair will assign each new case to a committee member, and the assigned committee member becomes the designated case lead. Assigned members will shepherd the case and really make it happen. So it's your case now until a recommendation is made. And historically, we used to assign cases by region, but that was really tough because the caseload would become very unequal pretty quickly. There was 2, maybe 3 of us that had probably 90% of the cases. And then it's a lot of, it can be a lot of work. Some cases are more work than others. So we're gonna distribute them more equally. And probably, I think what we're gonna do is just go down the list, whoever hasn't been assigned a case yet, or who's been assigned a case or who's got the least cases will get the next one. Once case information has been compiled by either Kira, the Research Bureau, or you as a committee member, the case lead will present an overview and findings and lead this discussion among all the members and advisors and cooperators. And then the geographic naming is really based on that BGN PPPs, the principles, policies, and procedures. So all the discussion is sort of within that context of the PPPs. And then the committee members will vote to recommend for approval or disapproval of that proposal when we're ready. It's possible that during a meeting, we might just defer that case to a future meeting if we decide that we need a little more information. Okay, next slide, please. So what are your responsibilities? So as a committee member, you'll be doing some research on the historical connection and validity of the proposal. There's always geographic review. So what does the feature look like? Is it a hill? Is it a mound, a creek? What county is it in? Who are the surrounding landowners and stakeholders? And maps are great. We love maps. They help a lot. And then stakeholder outreach. Of course, by the time you get the case, there has been a bit of stakeholder outreach done already, but there's a good chance that there's going to be more to do by the time you get the case. And then you're going to want to maintain communication and update the case progress with the California State Library, Kira, and she'll be diligently tracking the progress in the tracking logs for us. And then when the case is ready, you present the merits of the case and lead the committee discussion to move for committee vote. And then during this whole process, I know we've said this a million times, but it's really important to understand those 3 Ps, the principles, policies, and procedures, and how to apply them to the case. And you know, will learn that as we go. And it's a discussion. It's not up to you individually, but we all do it together. And just a little reminder, the committee is advisory only, so we're weighing the evidence and applying the 3 Ps. We try not to get our opinions involved, but as Jim mentioned, there's a lot of nuances and there's some interpretation. So it can get really complicated at times. Let's see, let's go to the next slide, please. Let's see, the considerations, we've kind of already gone through this. So the main ones are commemorative. So if it's a long-term association with the feature or significant contribution to the area or community by that person. Local historical usage, if it's derogatory or offensive. And this is the one that can be pretty nuanced. So for example, we have a name on the docket now that's Chinaman Creek because it's derogatory. So some people may consider the term Chinaman derogatory, others may not. And then federal, tribal, state, local, and private opinion, the wilderness issue that both Jim and Jenny talked about. And another one is nearby name duplication. So if a proposal comes in and there's already a name, so like say there's a mountain called Black Mountain that already exists, and then another proposal comes in to try and name another mountain nearby Black Mountain, this could become a safety issue for emergency response and navigation. So they need to be able to find the correct Black Mountain. Next slide, please. So this is the same slide that we were looking at the beginning of the process. I just wanted to kind of use it as a summary, just to drill in. Starts with the Board of Geographic, the BGN. We do all the processing and the local research and come together as a committee to vote, and then we send our recommendation back to the BGN and they get to make the final decision. But hopefully now this slide makes a little more sense. And I know this is a lot of information that we've been going over, and you're absolutely welcome to ask questions to me directly after the meeting if you want to reach out through email or phone call. And we are going to take, I think we'll have a little bit of time at the end of this presentation for questions. Oh, and I did want to mention that our committee it's not subject to the Bagley-Keene, but in general, we are going to use it as a guideline for best practices. So, you know, the public's welcome to join our meetings. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a list of our open cases. It's 2 slides worth. So these are starting with the older cases. You can see there's a couple on there that are from 2014, so they're 6 years old. They've been a thorn in our sides, but eventually we'll get them figured out. Those are the squad names. And you'll definitely hear quite a bit more detail about those at our first working meeting. And then some of these have already been assigned to committee members. And if they're already assigned to committee members, then we'll keep them and we'll continue to move them forward. But but then there's the new names. Since we haven't met in a whole year, about half of the proposed names have not been assigned to anybody. So they'll go through the entire process that I just described. And then someone will get assigned. Each of you will get assigned at least one case, probably in the next coming meeting. But we will be discussing the cases that have already been assigned at the next meeting also. Next slide. So here's the rest of the list. These are some of the newer ones. You can see there's the Dagdao Goet Wata Creek on there. So we'll continue looking into that situation. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just wanted to end with a proposal that is probably coming down the pipe. This is kind of a nice one, or a good example of a typical situation, I guess. Actually, there's no typical situations, but this is just another good story. So this is probably going to come in. There's a slough in Marin County called Black John. And there's someone that would like to rename it to Pinkston Slough. So this is an example of questionable derogatory name. So the word black is not offensive, but there's other nuances going on here. And so basically the name probably originated from a nickname of a fellow named John Henry Pinkston, who arrived in Marin County in 1844 as a freed slave. So the name Black John was given to the landowner once he owned the land. So I suspect if this does make it to our committee, it hasn't been listed on the review list yet, but it will probably give us some lively conversations about maintaining historical usage versus what's offensive, or maybe not. Maybe everyone will be on the same page. So I know I kind of rushed through that, but I do feel like everyone's heard a lot of repetition between Jim and Jenny and I, so I hope that helps kind of absorb the process a little bit. Next slide, please. So finally, we've scheduled the first working meeting for Friday, May 7th, 9:30. We don't put an end time because we will ask you to set your whole day aside, especially since we're so backlogged. But basically, we just stay in session until we get through the cases. So before we just jump into the cases, we'll definitely review the processes first, since for many of you, this is going to be your first meeting. So I don't want you to feel like you have to know everything that we already told you today. There'll be lots of review. And then we're hoping to hold a second meeting. We're gonna try and get on this 3 meetings a year schedule. So we've scheduled out a second meeting for August 13th. And I suspect the first meeting is going to be in virtual, probably the second one too, but we'll just see how that goes. And I really look forward to meeting all of you. A little more detail. So with that, well, we only have 5 minutes left, but does anyone have any questions? Lizzie, do we have any questions in the chat?
I see one person, Jeannie Waller from Caltrans. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks to all for the overview and the background. This has just been super interesting to hear the history and all the guidelines. I wondered, Tiffany, if you can answer this, otherwise happy to have some discussion offline. It sounds like the process for the BGN has always been, reactive to proposals and, communities or individuals coming forward and offering or proposing to change the name, and that there has not ever been sort of a more proactive outreach process. I think, at Caltrans, we have, our list is probably quite a bit smaller than yours. It's like a few hundred names. And so we are thinking about maybe taking a more proactive approach and trying to set some criteria of what types of names we might consider, or, something like that, laying out some guidelines. So just want to, offer that again. We want to work with you, learn from your process, but because we have maybe a shorter list, we have been thinking about how could we be proactive in really going after some of the names that we know might have an offensive history. So just, I don't, again, we can have more discussion later, but it's sort of a question and sort of just a comment for how we're thinking about approaching this.
Yeah, and the California Geographic Names Committee has not dealt with that, as we haven't been proactive in the past. We take proposals and then deal with those. So this might be a really good conversation to have with Jenny offline. She's got a lot of good perspective. So maybe we can set something with.
I might chime in here if that's okay, Tiffany.
Yeah.
I think the great thing about expanding the composition of this group is also to educate kind of the public on the role of this committee, but also let them know how the process works, and if there is a desire to rename something, of really guiding them to the process to submit an application with the USBGN. And I think this group too, if there's names that we maybe, and I recognize, there's some backlog that we need to get through, but if there are some names that seem very obvious that you guys are hearing from your stakeholders, constituents, et cetera, I think, that's something that we can discuss, of still going through the process of still going to the USBGN for that initial review. So I definitely think there's opportunities, but I would say just kind of underscoring the point of keeping it still within the process that's been laid out.
And it's possible that Jeannie's situation will be a little more simple. I don't know, Jenny could speak better to this, because your features are man-made, right? So they're not natural features, so they don't have to go through the same lengthy process.
Right.
That we just described.
Yeah, I think the concern is that, some communities may not have the capacity to go through the process. We're looking at equity and working with underserved communities. And so the idea that, we might be able to identify them and then reach out to the community and help them go through the process. So just thinking about that benefit of being more proactive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, nice.
Yeah, and all that, a big part of that is education, outreach, awareness, just letting people know about this process. Many of you here are hearing this for the first time today. Imagine your folks out on the landscape. They have no clue what the process is. And we don't want to make it sound like it's so cumbersome that people are turned away from before they even try. You're right, you all can do a lot to help shepherd it through the process. But Tiffany's right too, that, Jeannie, a lot of your features are going to be man-made. And so you may have your own internal agency processes for names. Just as those features were named originally, there were guidelines and rules. Now you may have to develop your own internal guidelines on how to rename some of those places. Now, of course, a lot of those man-made features may refer to or relate to a nearby natural feature. So as long as people understand that, say, I don't know, a bridge gets renamed if it refers to a nearby canyon, the canyon doesn't automatically get renamed just because you rename the bridge. That's a separate process. Again, the administrative name, the man-made feature, goes through your agency. You make the decision. That's pretty much it. The canyon would have to go through the BGN and California committee process. So it's not necessarily going to happen at the very same time or even concurrently. It could be, but there's a perception that, oh, we're going to change all the names in the county that have a particular word. No, again, it's back to that case by case. So It may seem more laborious, but in the long run, it's the way to go.
Thanks, Jenny. And just a time check, it is 11:31. So if people have to leave, please feel free to go. But we do have a couple more questions, and I can hang out for another 10, 15 minutes. If we want to continue discussions, please stay on. So Rich, did you have a question?
Yeah,
or a comment?
not so much of a question, but a comment just for the group. In the past, we've had the definite good times of meeting in person and the benefits of being, when showing a case, to pass maps around the table, to all look at the same website, to do those kinds of things. And we can all talk back and forth and look at a document and pass it around. For the next couple of meetings, we're going to be learning new ways of doing business too. We don't have the benefit. So for new people, you'll see, I think some of the old cases will have, the person will have some documents to show, but being able to show things is going to be a skill we're going to have to get better at real quick. That's just one of the things, we haven't talked about it yet, but having that audio-visual capability for everybody to see and make a decision is going to be really key.
Yeah, and as technology changes, we have more tools at our fingertips that maybe we have to learn as far as mapping and presentations and things like that.
Yeah, I think the lead member who's leading the case is going to have to really think that, oh, I've got to have my visual stuff and ready to go.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Yeah, that's a good point. Susan, looks like you have a comment or a question.
I have a question. I'm just wondering where I can get access to manuals or guidebooks, especially regarding the 3 Ps.
Yeah, they're right on the Board of Geographic Names website, and I think Lizzie has already sent them out, maybe not.
Yeah, I did. I'll recirculate it around to all the members, just to have it at the top of the inbox, the 3 Ps, the guidelines from the USBGN. And then we also, we should actually also make sure it's uploaded on there. We've been in the process of updating the Kagan website, so it now has our charter on there. We'll link that USBGN document as well. And then we'll also be uploading over between now and the next meeting the casework tracking process to have more visibility to the public through that system.
Yeah, and I think the 3 Ps, it's at least 100 pages, but it's probably worth printing out and just having with you. Well, I'm thinking in the context that we come to the meeting together, but I guess maybe you don't have to print it out. If you're sitting at your computer, you can look at it.
And a lot of it is the again, the principles and policies, and a few pages on the history alone, which you may not ever want to read again. You got the gist of it today. Chapter 4 is all about the procedures, so that's a little bit, again, repetition of what you've already heard today. But and then there's a glossary at the end, and there's a copy of our application form. So it may look overwhelming. I think it's actually more like 80 pages, but it's hopefully legible. And I'll say too, thanks, Lizzie. We're also updating our website all the time. We're trying to revamp some of our frequently asked questions. We got a couple of new ones we just updated on how to change offensive name. Why does the process take so long? Which is a constant complaint that we get. Why? And the reason is because of all the outreach has to be done. What is the importance of reaching out to our tribal governments, our Native communities? That's a new FAQ we have, and we're redoing our fact sheets, which you can print out, and if you go to a conference, you can take them and hand them out. So yeah, even though so I would say, yeah, having a link on your website is best. That way people can keep up to date with any changes that we're making, and certainly feedback from all of you. If you see something on the website that's just not clear, or if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to the general public either. So we need your feedback. We've been doing this so long, we take for granted we know what these things mean. But we look forward to your input. Let us know what more you need from us, and any of you want to just call us offline for a conversation about a particular name you're aware of, or a particular general area or a case or a region of the state that you've got a lot of issues. We love to take calls and chat with you, as you can tell, all day long if it takes to, and we can have small sessions of subgroups to get into some of the weeds if need be. But we want to be here to work with you. We've got a long history of working together, and we look forward to the next chapter in the committee's life. So,
thanks, Jenny. And it's true, you are very easy to get a hold of, even though you're in a 3-hour different time zone. You're still always available. And Susan, with the 3 Ps, I think Jenny kind of alluded to this, but really, like when you start looking at your proposal, there's only like a page or 2 that is related to your issue of that proposal. So it's, you just got to find that section and then comprehend it and see how it applies to your case.
I don't see any more raised hands, but I'd say if anybody else has a question now, feel free to chime in. Great. Not seeing or hearing anyone. Maybe Tiffany, I'll just kind of reiterate, if you have any questions on any of this, I know it was a lot of information today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Tiffany and myself. I'll recirculate those documents and also link to the website for you guys to have as reference. And then, yeah, we'll spend a couple moments at the top of the next meeting just to kind of review our specific committee process as a refresher. As Tiffany alluded to, we'll review, so from the kind of the previous committee, they were already doing casework and had done a lot of great work. So they'll be presenting that to the committee, and then we'll be introducing new cases that you saw on that list that will then get assigned to committee members to start that process of vetting and stakeholder outreach. So with that, thank you, everybody. Happy Friday, and looking forward to working with all of you on this.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Tiffany. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And I look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you.
In May. Thanks.
Bye.